So welcome everybody, visiting masters, first warden, liverymen, guests, welcome to the annual Sylvia Tutt Memorial Lecture. As many of you will know, Sylvia Tutt was the first ever Lady Master of a livery company, our company, the Chartered Secretaries, in 1983. Past Master Tutt bequeathed us a legacy which continues to support our aim to achieve and promote excellence in corporate governance across all types of organisations, and to honour her generosity, our annual lecture is named after her. This evening, our guest speaker for our 2026 lecture is Gilbert George, Executive Director of Corporate Governance at Nottingham University Hospital's NHS Trust and Trust Board member. Alongside his trust work, Gilbert is a specialist advisor on the National Race Equality Code. He has been nominated and shortlisted for the UK Governance Professional of the Year across public, private and third sectors. He is described as being a focused and driven executive with a track record of success and, I quote, a leading governance influencer with an engaging approach that binds cutting-edge intellectual thinking with a winning of hearts and minds, firmly placing governance as the bedrock for organisations, striving to be outstanding, skilled in providing proactive policy advice to governors, chairs, trust boards and fellow executives in the NHS. Gilbert will not be able to stay on after the panel discussion for drinks and networking. He will be dashing off to the House of Lords, where he will present at the Caribbean Global Awards branch launch. But we are delighted to have him here with us this evening to deliver his lecture entitled Governance Reimagined, the Power of Empowering Values. Join me in welcoming Gilbert George.
That's a lot to live up to, but it's a real great privilege to be here this evening amongst such honoured individuals, and I hope that the lecture this evening will do justice in terms of what we're going to be discussing concerning reimagining governance. I'm going to talk about transformative governance, but perhaps a more apt word is reimagine governance. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's thinking about how governance can be different to equip us in today's modern society. And I'm going to go back to old school in this respect. And one of the tools that I want to emphasize this evening is a little word, but very powerful. And that word is values. In an increasingly complex world, governance isn't just about policies, procedures, or structures. It is about people, culture, and values, the invisible force that drives decisions and shapes organisations. But before I go on to expand on that theme of governance and reimagining and transformation, I'm going to take you onto a journey. In fact, we're going to go onto a journey. We're going to go back in time, and you'll understand why I'm going to say. So, my mother and father came to England in the early 1960s, and Mum was a very, very strong woman in terms of her determination to succeed, and for her children to succeed in whatever avenue they chose. Mum also had very strong values. And one of the things that Mum instilled when we were quite small in us was the whole concept of respect. And in that came a thought and a feeling that whoever we met in life, that we had to show courtesy. More than that though, even to strangers, Mum would expect us to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to whoever we met that we made eye contact with. She said it was important to welcome all. And to that extent, that value that Mum taught me from a young age has stayed with me all my life. And I find myself, particularly when coming to London, that I need to be restrained, because the temptation to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to a stranger may not always be welcomed. And if you say it to someone of the opposite sex who don't know you, it can have all sorts of things to go with that. So I found myself having to restrain myself. But the key point is this. The values Mother taught me from young has stayed with me all my life. And therefore, values can be enduring. And I'll come back to that a bit later on, the importance of values in terms of that concept of enduring. But let's start off with some really, really basics, going back to governance in terms of its meaning and understanding, as we understand it, back when the first concept of governance came about in terms of the Greek word there. The Greek word has that connotation of steering or being a pilot or a helmsman on a ship. It is about guiding and controlling and directing one to a destination. So you can imagine if you're on a ship, you've left port, you've got a direction of travel, you've got a destination, you know what your objectives are, and you as a helmsman with your crew are going to work together in unity to get to that destination. And that's what the word governance is about in that respect. And we'll explore how that still has connotation in our modern era. But for those who've ever been on a ship and had the experience of being a helmsman, it's not the easiest of things. When I was young, I had the privilege of going on the ship and going with about 15 of us in the crew. And we went out the Thames Estuary, past Canvey Island, out to the Wash. And all of a sudden, we hit a storm. And guess who was the helmsman? Yes, it was me. I had the captain barking orders and telling me the direction of travel in terms of what degrees I ought to be steering at. And it was fanatic in terms of the weather, the noise, and it was the most scariest thing I've ever experienced. But working together, knowing our direction of travel, what our goal and objectives was, and working harmoniously as a team, we were able to get to our destination. And that's important in any organisation, whether you're in the public sector or in the private sector. No one can achieve anything on their own. It is about working as a team. So we have this concept or this sense of understanding about the word governance, about a direction of travel, reaching a destination, this whole concept of a pilot or a helmsman. If you go back in ancient times, in fact, in terms of that furthering the understanding of a governance, we think about the ancient times in terms of civilization in Mesopotamia or Greece or Egypt or in Rome. They too had structures and governance and ways of directing their citizens. We had codes and legal statutes as well. In fact, go back to 1754 BCE was one of the earliest legal codes that was established. In fact, the legal code that talked about penalties for medical malpractice, strict rules on buildings, all the way BC 754. So governance has always been around, as it were, and having an impact on society. But how about today? How are we to understand governance in this very complex world that we're living in? Well, from that simple act of destination, working in harmony, as it were, if you're on a ship or a pilot, we have complex systems of societies in our world today. Then there's this governance guide society, organizations and institutions, but also we encompassing within governance are accountability, transparency, fairness, being responsive. And traditional governance is sort of anchored in this rules, compliance, procedures, risk management. Many of those facets we're familiar with. But can we say that those traditional ways of governance can continue to help us to do what is right in our complex world today? But unfortunately, there are some limitations. There are limitations in holding on to the concept of traditional governance in how I've just described it in terms of compliance, procedures, process, risk management. There's a lot more that's required. So let's think about some of these limitations that we may come across in today's modern world, as it were. Well, we know we live in a very complex society. We think about climate change. We think about AI. And when you think about AI, it's just beyond our imagination in terms of what can be done. And framing governance and having rules and procedures, it's very, very difficult in a fast-moving environment as AI. Biosecurity. We've seen many companies hit by cyber threats, pandemics. And think about governance in terms of geopolitical issues and the decision-makings that are made at the very top and the impact that those decisions are having on the world today. And are they making the right decisions within an appropriate governance framework? Question mark. But also governance per se in terms of the traditional way is also rooted, and perhaps to some extent, overly in bureaucracy and being rigid. Failing to engage and empower individuals and as a collective in decision-making and holding on to governance. The lack of alignment between organisational culture and values and governance. And sometimes we actually just focus too much on compliance and have a tick-box mentality when there's a lot more that's required. And this can lead, unfortunately, to disengagement, poor decision-making, and even ethical lapses. But on the other hand, enlightened governance features a notion that we're all familiar with, that notion of purpose. What do we mean by that? In today's enlightened world, in regards to governance, we've talked about the traditional aspects of governance and some of the difficulties that we now face in our complex world. What we've also got to keep in mind, though, is this whole concept of organisation serving the public, or those who are serving their shareholders to make a profit, and this concept of purpose. What do we mean by that? Well, those who function in organisations have a responsibility and have a licence to some extent, or a social licence, we call it. The credibility and the moral authority to act. That's a given if you're serving an organisation by your statutes, by your constitution. It's a given. We're also given the legitimacy to act in terms of the power that we have. But in using that power, it is expected that that power is used in a fair and exercised in the right way. It's more than just the legality of what we do in our decision. We're given trust. Trust by members of the public that we serve, or those who we aspire to make profits for, our shareholders, in that we use our power and authority in an appropriate way. But all of this is underpinned by values. And in fact, the expression empowering values. So let's just have some thought process in terms of this concept of empowering values. As you know, just in terms of textbooks, so we say, in terms of values, these are deeply held beliefs that guide behaviour, decision-making. They can empower in terms of inspire and motivate. Values can also enable people to act with integrity. If we have values to the core in our organisations that we work for, and as an individual, and as a collective, how will that impact on our behaviour in the business world? Well, you can imagine if you've got a business, you're a manufacturer, and you come across a fault within either your process or system that has a negative impact on those who are going to use your goods, and you're aware there's a fault or something that's gone wrong, rather than allow that to continue for a period of time, if we have value with integrity as a core, it would force us, in terms of our behaviour, to take action. Either we stop making that product until we sort out what's gone wrong, and we inform the public at large as soon as we're aware, rather than allow these things to continue and try to sort things out in the background. In the NHS, we have a concept of candor. When things have gone wrong, there is an obligation to speak up as soon as we can and inform those individuals who have been on the receiving end in a negative way. And folks may be aware of the Hillsborough Bill that's going through Parliament as we speak, that will be one of the key requirements in terms of the duty of candour. But if you've got integrity, that should just be the norm. As soon as something's gone wrong, we should be willing to speak and answer up any questions that may be posed to us, but inform folks accordingly. Accountability. If you've got values to the core, accountability, again, will be something that will just be part of our key concepts in what we do. We recognise we have responsibility and accountability in what we do. We are accountable for our behaviours and the decisions that we make. Whether they're right or they're wrong, it is our decision. We are accountable for those. Courage. If values are to the core, we'll be courageous. And in being courageous means that you may need to stand out. You may need to be different. You may need to be swimming against the tide. I won't talk about the geopolitical world that we're living in today. Imagine standing up to individuals who are forthright in what they want to achieve and what they want to do. And you've got to stand up and say, no, there's no legal basis for that action. And everyone's against you. But if you've got values to the core, you would be courageous and take a stand for what is right. Courageous values also inherent being respectful to all that we deal with. It means being transparent as well in what we do. And that is so important in the sector that I work in the health sector, that we're transparent in what we do. And that's why we have open public board meetings, so that members that we serve can see the decisions that we're making, and more importantly, hold us to account. We'd be collaborating, and we'd be inclusive as well. I'm just going to test out this theory about being inclusive. For those of us who have staff meetings, you've got an all-staff meeting, and you ask a question, and you've got a sea of hands go up, which hand do you tend to favour to pick first? Is it those that we know, or those who may have seniority of position in the organisation? And that is perhaps the norm, the tendency, to pick someone that you know or someone that's very senior. But being inclusive means we want to include all. So when I started my position at Nottingham University, my first meeting with my staff, all my staff were gathered together, and the first thing I said to all of them, in my team meetings, there is no hierarchy. Everyone will have the opportunity to say or ask a question, or to give some thoughts about a solution to a problem. It's not based on seniority. We may not always agree with that person in what they've said, i.e. we'll agree to disagree. But the one thing we would do is show each individual respect. And so my meetings are held with that notion that anyone who comes along has an entitlement, if they feel, to put their hands up and ask a question or propose a solution. So when we speak about values, the empowerment of values, it is these key concepts that we're talking about. We're not talking about policies and procedures and compliance. We're talking about something far greater and much deeper to influence our decision-making and our actions. And what does this do? Values become a living culture. It has power, and it can transform. And so for me, in governance terms, values are extremely important in the way that we do business and in the way that we act in regards to other individuals that we have dealings with. So let's think about this concept of values in terms of its being transformative. Things that values can do, it can create trust. When values are clear and lived, and particularly when leadership of any organization combines those values in their actions and in their speech on a daily basis. It can enhance accountability, people holding themselves and others to a higher standards, particularly those organizations and individuals who are serving the public. It can drive ethical decisions, help us to navigate complex dilemmas beyond the rule book, adopting principles that can help shape our decision-making. It can foster engagement, being inclusive, wanting to collaborate so we make the best decisions. And also, it can encourage innovation. Values-driven culture supports learning and adaptability. So what practical steps then can be employed to transform an organisation who really want to strive to have values as their core to empower their organisation so that they have effective and efficient governance? Some practical steps. Define and communicate core values clearly, aligned with the mission of our organisation. As mentioned, lead by example. It's one thing having something written down, but a far greater weight if we adopt our values in our behaviour and in our speech. Integrate values in our policies, decision-making, and performance metrics. Provide training to our staff in terms of values. Help them to understand why values are important to your organisation, and more importantly, how we will all benefit from applying values on a day-to-day basis. Create open channels for feedback and dialogue to reinforce trust and accountability, and recognise and reward behaviours that reflect empowering values. Often we see in the workplace we have annually at the NHS in our organisation, awards are given out for high achievers or things that people have done that's exceptional. And mostly there's a strong foundation of values connected to what they've achieved. So it's really important that we think about values in this broader concept. Now, as a board, not so long ago at NUH, we set ourselves a little task. And that was to produce a statement as concisely as possible about the purpose of our organisation. It might sound simple, but when you've got at least 14 individuals in the same room, trying to think about the purpose, which is a bit is not so difficult, but trying to think about the purpose with the values and the mission of the organisation in very concise words is not so easy. This is what we came up with. Obviously, the statement's got to be clear and, more importantly, understood by all. But we felt in the NHS, for our board in particular, that integrity was a key word, both as individuals and also as a collective. We felt in the NHS, in our board, that being held to account was also extremely important. We know there's a plethora of inquiries going on at this point in time. I myself am involved in 3 different inquiries and 2 police operations. And one of the things we've been ensuring as best we can is to recognise our responsibilities and that we're accountable, even for decisions that we didn't make, which previous boards made, but the fact is, it's our watch now. So we're accountable and we have to own it. We also outlined our outcomes, which was high quality health outcomes. And yes, we recognise we have a duty to the taxpayer. We've got to try to stay within our resources. Very, very difficult in the health sector at this point in time. Very, very difficult with the acuity of patients that we see and the volumes that we see. But that's what we came up with, a sense of who we are individually and collectively as a board in terms of our purpose and those that we want to serve. So if you get some time, if you're working with an organisation, have a go. Try to come up with the purpose of your organisation in a concise way and having values at its core. Not easy, but have a go. So what we come to recognise is that governance does not have to be dry, bureaucratic exercise, pen-pushing, tick-box mentality. It doesn't have to be none of that. We've got to use our imagination to deal with the complex world that we find ourselves in and society. And by harnessing the power of values can be a tool that can be applied effectively to help us. By putting values at the heart of governance, organisations can unlock the full potential of the people that they have in their organisation. They can foster trust and navigate complexity with integrity. The future of governance is not just about rules, it's about values that empower. And as I think back to my dear old mother who's passed away and the values that she instilled in me from a young boy, I can honestly say that values are enduring. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Master. The reason I'm sitting here is for the last 3 or 4 years, I've had the privilege and the pleasure of chairing the group which has overseen the research which this company and Leeds Beckett have funded, which resulted in this publication, which those of you who were here last year would have heard launched, the importance of values for governance. And I'll just say before anybody else does, there is a remarkably close alignment between what Gilbert has shared with us tonight and the findings of this research. What I'm going to do is to invite each of the 3 respondents just in less than 3 minutes to react to what Gilbert has shared with us, and then we'll open it up for questions, and I'm going to start with you, Simon.
I'm going to rely upon you to cut me off at 3 minutes. Okay? The first thing, I want to say how splendid the lecture was. Is that okay? Yeah. I think it provides the basis for a deep dive into this whole notion of values and governance, and paves the way for looking at the core condition of values, which is ownership. How many of you own values? It's an interesting question. If you go to Gil's book on the accountant's truth, are there any accountants here tonight? Very good, very good. It's worth reading. 2011, The Accountant's Truth. His research is to talk to recent professionals in accountancy and ask them, do you have any values? Yes. We have a few, yes. And would you change those values? No, but we might do if the boss says so. Quite seriously, there have been no reflection on ownership of values. You've been telling us about ownership through family, etc. So where does the ownership begin, and what is it about? Somewhere it's about getting a definition of the values. But defining values is very difficult. If we had more time, we would explore what perhaps the meaning of the word integrity, and we would come up with at least a dozen different definitions. But Aristotle, interestingly, doesn't go into an awful lot of definitions around that particular area. He says you begin to work this out by experience. You begin ownership through experience, and you begin to develop that ownership through two things. One is by engaging difference, a different viewpoint from yours. And at that point, you've got to work out, we're now in the world where we're into binary thinking, and we don't think about the difference. We don't think about how we can hold together two different approaches. But secondly, when we are faced with a value dissonance, is it to be justice, or is it to be love? That's the big Christian thing. Which is it to be? Only when we're faced by that dissonance do we begin to own these values and the related virtues. And that's somewhere that we begin to move into developing a culture which welcomes dissonance, which welcomes dialogue. I'll finish there.
Thank you very much indeed. Sam.
Thank you. I'll look at this from a practical point of view. So at London South Bank University, we have something that we call epic values, and it's an analogy that we use because I think for us as in the governance profession, we will constantly be tested with regards to our integrity and what our values are. In a scenario whereby we're losing resources, we're considered as administrators, we really need to consider what is our North Star. So we can get into the fora that will allow us to have really difficult conversations if we know what our values are. So every single day, I have a conversation with my team with regards to what are we doing today that's epic? So we've got a huge poster that we hold up. You know, we are an epic governance office, and it's EPI. This is embarrassing if I get it wrong. EPIIC. And so, you know, are we excellent? Are we professional? Do we have integrity? Are we inclusive? And are we innovative? And if we're not, then we're not continuing with it. So we really, really push for integrity and how we use values. When we're in these difficult conversations, it allows us to stand and hold our own as governance professionals. And what we have to do is consider, is it appropriate for us to move outside this framework? And if it's not, then we don't have involvement in it. So as I said, when we're looking at our morning meetings, it's really, really important for us that if we are tested, we can hold our own, as I said, with any of the issues that we're put into. I recently had an interview that didn't go so well. It started well, and then halfway through realized that actually the culture of this organization didn't align with my values, and so I closed it. It was a really learning opportunity for me, in the fact that I had lost my way a little while beforehand, and realized that actually if something doesn't align with my values, then I don't want involvement in it. And we as governance professionals have to push forward for that, because as I said, we will be tested. You know, with limited resources, there will be shortcuts. We will be asked to do things that perhaps maybe don't align with our values. And if we have our North Star, we know exactly what we're doing and we know why. Thank you.
Thank you. And just following really from Simon, one of my experiences has been working with Save the Children, and they wanted a coaching course. And I was bimbling along, delivering coaching quite happily at the basic certificate level. Then as we were moving into diploma level and then master's level, I suddenly started to realize actually it was a corporate governance course, because they wanted to change the conversation in the organization. They wanted to do things that were good, and the bureaucracies of the organization were holding them back. And the way they found that this worked was improve the conversations in the boardroom, senior executives, the outrunning teams, and all the people through the organization. And their coaching program has enabled them to change the way that they do business and become more effective, which has been particularly difficult for them when there has been significant financial constraints that have been placed onto them. For me, one of the big things is that it's understanding that to get change, you've got to take people through transition. And transition is the psychological move of myself into another domain, and accepting possibly that I'm wrong and I need to do something to get myself out of it. And because of that, it can be an iterative process, particularly if you're working in a group, be that a boardroom or a frontline team. You're continually tugging away, and there is a tension of trying to change and trying to enable something. But it's only when those individuals accept it in their mind that good governance needs to be established, then things start to work well. And my last thing is really the Trinity. And the Trinity for me is good governance that is critically considered. In other words, we don't just follow rules, we look for performance. That informs good leadership, which in turn develops good strategy. And on one of our modules, we have governance, leadership, and strategy, because we try to get it into that order. If we have great leadership without good governance, then you don't know where they're going to go. If people do not understand strategy, then they're not going to put good governance practice into place. So it's a trinity of aspects that construct the reality of the organizational life. And the final thing for me there is it has to be lived and believed. And the only way you do that is having good conversations and checking that people are doing what they say they're doing. Is that okay?
Thank you very much for those. And just one comment from me before we go to your questions. One of the things that has struck me from what Gilbert said, what colleagues have shared, and what is in the excellent book by Pablo Lloyd, the Financial Times Business Ethic book, is how practical they have made values and ethics. And that's a very significant move from some of the, airy-fairy theoretical conversations. And I think that gives us a lot of hope as Chartered Secretaries. But now, it's over to you. The beadle will move among you with a microphone, and please feel free to put your questions to Gilbert, or indeed to any of our respondents. We have a question here.
Thank you. I'm Pablo Lloyd. Thank you for mentioning my book, David. I wasn't expecting that. I was curious, and a wonderful lecture. Thank you, Gilbert. It was inspiring. I'm curious about the question of whistleblowing, and some of my works involve speaking to whistleblowers and the fear, risk, and moral opportunity it gives us all. Any kind of insights into how we really create safe spaces for colleagues to speak up and effectively act as the antidote for moral failure?
Thank you very much for that question. In my role as Executive Director of Governance at Nottingham University, I first of all see myself as being the conscience of the organisation, and that's my starting point. And therefore, neither me, the board, the organisation, or the reputation of the board should exceed that, in terms of we want to do what is right. And in doing what is right means that we've got to allow and facilitate folks coming and speaking up, good or bad. And often when it's bad, we try to quell the speech, and therefore things that ought to come out don't come out. As mentioned, I'm heavily involved in at least 3 police operations and 2 inquiries. And I'm very fortunate in the organisation that I work that the chair and the chief executive have integrity at their core, which makes my job a lot easier. If that wasn't the case, I would have to look at my values and stand up for those values and perhaps go against the tide. So those who have that position where they can influence for the good must create and encourage a speaking up. We've got to be open and transparent in serving the public. That's got to be fundamental. Too much has gone underneath that should have been spoken up to, and the purpose of speaking up is that we learn from what's gone wrong, so that we can avoid those mistakes occurring again, so we can do better for those who we serve. And that is the moral obligation that all of us have.
Yes. Gilbert, thank you very much for that inspiring talk. Just picking up on what Nick Beach said about leadership, in my experience, and it's across a broad range of sectors, to be truly effective, values, the implementation of values has to be not just accepted by the chair and the chief executive, but be driven by them. And I'd just like your comments on that. I gather from what you just said that you have the support of them, but it's more than support, it's actually there driving it and be seen to be driving it. Thank you.
Indeed. I can't say too much, but in my hospital, we have a situation where there's a maternity inquiry. You'd have heard of Don Ockenden. These matters occurred not on our watch, but the chief executive and the chair and the board as a whole saw it fit to look at all of these maternity cases, but more than that. We saw it fit to actually meet them face to face. Those who had the terrible experience and faced the music, as it were, even though it wasn't on our watch. But we, as board members, recognise it's our position and we are accountable, even if it wasn't our decisions. But what happened, we have to own up to that and take responsibility. And so for us as an organisation, what we were trying to encourage for the leadership of the board as a whole is that when we speak to our clinicians in particular, when things haven't gone right, if they're doing operations, don't hide it. Create the forum where they can come and speak so we can learn to avoid that happening again in terms of mistakes. And hopefully you can get a culture that prevails in the organisation. But I must confess it takes time, it takes courage, and you're definitely putting your head above the parapet because your reputation as an organisation could be shredded. But standing on integrity and value, I think, gives us the foundation to make things better for the future.
Sir.
Sorry, thanks very much for your talk, Gilbert. Yeah. I had two questions that I wanted to ask. How do you keep values at the centre of an organisation when there is an increased focus on profitability? And my second question is, how do you prevent burnout in staff who act with integrity and have a sense of calling, particularly in health, and who are consistently expected to go above and beyond in order to enable the organisation to function effectively?
As we know in business, it is about making profits and increasing shareholders' wealth. But I believe those who are in business also have responsibilities to those who they are their clients and those who they serve in that respect. And one would hope that there is a moral aspect to this, in that whilst striving for profits and increasing shareholders' wealth is a key, one would also hope there is another element to all of this, and that as humans we seek to, as it were, build society for the better, for the future, no matter what products that we're making and what we're striving to do. So I would hope that that element of conscience comes into play in what people do and the decisions that they make, that they don't do things to the detriment of others. In regards to burnout, it is difficult. And I've had to reflect myself personally over the last year of working in an environment where I've been absolutely driven to the core. And it occurred to me not long ago, I was dreaming about my work. Actually dreaming about things I was doing in work. And I recognized I'd got to the point that I was so in pursuit of delivering that it's starting to play on my mind to that effect. And if it's playing on my mind, it must be playing on the minds of my staff. So of late, I've had to take a step back and look at myself in the mirror. Well, what's being driven and wanting to achieve, but at what cost? And so I started to think to my staff and speaking to them about objectives and goals that we have in mind. How are we going to deliver this? How can I, as a leader, be supportive towards my staff in a way that doesn't cause burnout, but yet we can still deliver? And therefore, it is about the ability to find solutions without costing. And that requires collectivism, of coming together. But it's difficult, I must confess. And when you're a person or individuals or collective that are driven in that way, you don't realize what damage you could be doing to others because you're in pursuit of the organization and its achieving. But we must all reflect, we're all humans, and we only have so much we can do and what we can achieve in terms of the abilities that we have. And burnout is certainly a cause. I'll just say one little thing. In my young days as an executive, one of my chief executives was a wing commander on espionage. That was his background. And he taught me some extreme things about what he went through. And one of the things he said to me, to never forget, we all have a ceiling point. We all have a point where we can break, never get there, but recognize it. And so my own thoughts that I've been reflecting on this last year in terms of my own staff is to think, am I pushing too hard to their detriment? And so compassionate leadership is key. And I've been having to reflect and relearn, as it were, what that means in practice.
Hang on to one more question.
Hi there, thank you for your excellent speech, Gilbert. I also dream about work, incidentally, just to let you know. You mentioned in your talk about bringing your team together to talk about values and mission statement, and often tie that together with the vision for the organisation or for the team. Should the vision determine the values, or should the values determine the vision?
I think all organisations need to have vision. You need to have a purpose on what you're there to do and what you're to achieve. But for me, the foundation's got to be values. As I said, it's one thing having objectives and a tick box approach, but to get the maximum out of it, to achieve something, if it's driven by values, I believe you'll achieve a lot more. So for me, once we discuss our objectives as a board and what we're going to be striving to do in year 1 or year 2, year 3, we always look underneath that and see what's the values that lies below that, and make sure those values are never trodden down, but they're the foundations that we're standing on in order to achieve. And that's the concept and ideas that I've got, and I try to do that as much as I can in my discussion with my fellow execs and board members. And as I said, I've got a wonderful board colleagues who are really embracing the aspects of values, and so it makes, as I said, makes my job a lot easier.
I just want to add to that the question of vision and values. What brings them together, I would want to argue, is narrative. Actually going back and thinking about the story of the organisation, because the story it goes back to the practice. You can see what the values are there. Now, Arthur Anderson, another accountant who problems there, of course. However, in his young days, he was very clear about ethics. And when he was a young accountant, he went to take the books to the Chicago Railway Company, and the CEO said, just change these figures here and there, would you? And then we'll continue with you. And Arthur Anderson said to him, with all the brashness of a young accountant, there's not enough money in the whole of Chicago that would make me change those figures. And suddenly you have a narrative, a story. And the story sums up courage. And the story sums up somebody who's prepared to respond and push back. Ironically, that was used in the training in Arthur Anderson accountancy for decades after that. However, once Enron appeared, they began to lose it, and they didn't use the story. And so those who were being trained were no longer trained with the narrative of the organization. But the only final point is everybody needs in some way to be involved in creating that narrative. There has to be a buy-in, an ownership of the narrative.
Let me just wind this part of our proceedings up by thanking very much the panel, thanking Leeds Beckett University for being our partners in this research. It was jointly funded by the two organisations. And an announcement. The company has decided that it would like to continue the research. But what has not yet been decided is the detailed direction. So on a date in May, we are going to have a brainstorming session. And if you are interested in taking part in that, could you tell me or Keith, our clerk, or Nick, and we will make sure that you are invited. Could I commend you to our research findings? And you'll find a lot in common between what's been said tonight and what's been found in this research. It's available online from the Leeds Beckett site. I've got a few leaflets with me. Unfortunately, these copies are like hen's teeth at the moment, so I'm not going to give mine away. And finally, before I introduce Sheila, I will return to Gilbert's point about dreaming, and I will reference the place that he is going on to from here. Some of you may have heard this story before, but it is about a member of the House of Lords who had a dream that he was making a speech in the House of Lords. And he woke up and found that he was. It's now my pleasure to hand to the chair of our Education Committee, who will tell you about this year's Tutt Award.
Taking that one? Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Just very briefly, I am delighted to be standing here again to announce the launch of the 2026 Sylvia Tutt Achievement Award, the third year of running this award. The Sylvia Tutt Achievement Award is a prestigious annual award offered by the Worshipful Company of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators as one of the livery companies in the financial services group of the City of London livery companies. The award itself was set up to recognise the achievements of Sylvia Tutt. As mentioned previously by our current master, the first female master of our company, and indeed the first female master of any livery company in the 900-year history of livery companies in London. Congratulations to the 2025 winners again, Ben Harrison, and to Thomas Malikel, who received a commended for his entry. I don't know, I think, Thomas, are you here with us this evening? I think he is. Congratulations again, Thomas, to you. So, anyone currently studying or researching governance at master's or above at a UK university, or in the first 5 years of their governance career, can submit a 1,000-word article written for a general rather than an academic audience. This year's topic, which quite a lot of conversation with the Education Committee, but this year's topic that we have come up with is as follows: AI, values and governance. AI is being used more and more in all contexts. In the pursuit of good governance, including references to your own business experiences, what do you see as the potential conflicts between using AI and upholding the values of an organisation? And how would you safeguard those values? We've heard so much from Gilbert this evening in his wonderful lecture about values, about enduring values, and that very much sat with me. My father was the one who gave me my values from a very young age, and they are enduring, aren't they? And reimagining governance. So I hope that the topic that we have chosen is a relevant one, an interesting one, and will lead to some really interesting conversations thereafter. I suppose the important bit for those who might be applying, their prize is £1,000 to spend on continuing professional development, plus a few other benefits, all of which are detailed on the WICSA website. And it's very definitely that the prize is about continuing professional development, because that very much runs in terms of Sylvia Tutt herself, who had a belief and an understanding of the importance of continuing professional development. And so we continue her legacy in that way also. And the deadline to receive applications, the 24th of July. So we are giving plenty of time to write those 1,000 words. So along with my fellow judges drawn from the WICSA membership and the Chartered Governance Institute, I look forward to some stimulating summer reading. If you know anyone who is studying governance at master's or above, or in the first 5 years of their governance career, do please encourage them to have a look on the WICSA website and consider writing that 1,000-word article on AI, values and governance. Thank you.
For a Science of a Master, who will summarise this evening. Very briefly, of course, Master.
I think that's a bit of a tall ask, isn't it, to summarise an evening like this? I'm not even going to attempt it, I'll be honest. I do want to thank Gilbert for being here with us tonight. He does have to dash off, and I'm really grateful for him taking the time to be here, so thank you so much. I also want to thank Simon and Nick from Leeds Beckett. Their engagement with us and continuing work with us is really special for us, so thank you for that. And to Samuel as well. Sam, thank you very much for joining the panel today. And David, as ever, thank you very much for chairing the panel and keeping us moving and keeping the conversation on values and ethics and integrity at the forefront for us here at the Livery Company. At this point, I don't want to delay any longer. I'd like us to move to drinks where everybody can ask those questions that they're burning to ask, but in more discreet and quiet circumstances. So please do move into the room to our left as we leave, and I'll see you out there for a drink.
Thank you very much.